I thought it was really interesting actually visiting the beaches themselves and finding that they're actually not really a site of sadness or even tragedy, but they almost seem more, they felt more tranquil, that they felt more like, that they are still beaches, they are what they were beforehand, that even though that this tragedy has happened, it has not deeply affected them. And I feel like that says a lot about the French, actually, who don't let horrors of the world like actually truly affect them. They just keep going on with their lives. They find a problem, they solve it, and then they keep going.
On the hot seat. All right. Anything?
Okay.
Yes.
So one thing that I found really interesting was just being on like the beaches, especially Omaha Beach, and like just seeing how like beautiful, like peaceful it was, and like I was like thinking about Ernie Pyle's column where he was talking about how it was a lovely day to stroll on the beach, but then like contrast that with just like the horrors of like these bodies and the destruction, like on that shore and like in the water. So it's just like, I don't know, it's kind of interesting like thinking, because it's like easy about how easy it is to forget while you're walking on like, you know, this beautiful like day, you know, on the beach, like that this happened there. And it's, I don't know, and it was like people like kids were like, there were like these little kids having fun, like, you know, people like were writing things in the sand, and it was just, I don't know, it was interesting, that contrast like between like, you know, the history and like, you know,
See, the most interesting I saw today was Point de Hoc, and I think it's just because like we only like read about D-Day and everything like that, but to actually be there and like see where they went and like to know even like the Germans' position on the hill and everything, and the craters were insane as well. So just to be able to like be there, and it's like one of the most beautiful beaches and skylines I've seen, but like it's weird to know that something like that happened there too.
Okay, so Cody, tell me about one thing you found interesting today.
So when we were walking around on Normandy, like out on the beach, on Omaha Beach, it was really interesting to look at the water kind of like splashing up onto the sand, and to like try to imagine in your brain that something that violent could happen there, because we were all talking about how it's just so peaceful and perfect that we can't even imagine that happening.
One thing that stuck out to me was when Sophie, our tour guide, was telling us about the confusion of the locals around here, you know, hearing about this liberation coming, but being bombed by these, you know, people who they thought were going to be their saviors, and then also, you know, being treated not much better post-liberation. So that's something we don't learn about back home, so I'm glad I learned it here.
All right. Tell me one thing you found interesting.
I definitely found it interesting, the idea that our cemeteries are different from another type of cemetery just because of the cultural. So like the German cemeteries, they want to fit more into the landscape and the earth, and then the American cemetery was way different because it was a monument basically. So
I'll take that.
I don't like it. Okay, so one thing I found really interesting was when we were at the beaches and our tour guide was talking a lot about the rangers and how they couldn't carry a lot of like guns or anything because they had to like go up these cliffs, and so they just had knives, and then once they got up there their reinforcements didn't come, and then they had to like hold it down for a while, and so they just held down this huge area, and there was like only 10 of them with just like long knives, and I thought that was like super badass, and I didn't know they did it without like guns. So,
one thing I found interesting was the big craters at Pointe de Hoc, and I didn't realize that they were going to be so huge and that like they would have been still there, I guess. I thought that they would have weathered away as time went on, but the nature grew with them. I found that interesting. I have a picture of you in it.
I really liked Pointe de Hoc because it was just really cool. Like, I don't know what a bomb does. I've never seen like a bomb go off, so like the craters were huge and really cool. So I climbed to the bottom of a couple of them to take some pictures just because I kind of wanted to, and like the little kid in me was like, hill, climb down it. So I did, and it was pretty cool, and it was kind of just interesting that you can walk through all this history, and like flowers grew back and grass grew back, and like life moves on even though there's still some things there to look at from the past.
Okay, one thing I found really interesting today was the journalist memorial was seeing like James Foley's name in the same place that like Ernie Pyle's name was. Just like really made Ernie Pyle real, just because like we could see the effects of James Foley's death today, but we really don't see Ernie Pyle. So like seeing them together definitely made like the whole Ernie Pyle experience more real.
I think the things that I found most interesting out of today would have probably been seeing the cemeteries alongside the beaches, because putting a number to what was lost on those beautiful beaches, that contrasts so much of what they represent to us historically and culturally. It really affects you, even if it's, because we went to the American and the German cemetery, and even, it doesn't matter which one you went to, it still really affects you down. Despite what you feel or what convictions you have, you know that men gave their lives despite what side they're on, whether it was for the greater good or for themselves.
The thing that I found really interesting today, excuse me, was the craters at the beach. That really impacted me because you can read about these things all you want, you can read as many books, look at as many pictures, but until you see it in person, you don't really understand the magnitude of it, I guess. Like being in London, for example, we saw the bullet and the shrapnel like indents on the buildings, but seeing the bomb craters was crazy to me. That really gave me an interesting perspective.
I think one of the things that impacted me most about today and just was like really stood out to me was just how normal these beaches seem nowadays. Like we were talking about how, you know, Steve mentioned that he like saw people playing like beach volleyball and like in the sand people are writing like LOL smiley face on Omaha Beach, and just thinking about like the pile columns and all of these things, it's like what he was seeing and what we have seen are completely different, and it's just, it really just blew my mind, and just how these are normal beaches now, and they're some of the most beautiful beaches I've ever seen, but it's just the history and that historical moment, the significance of it is really impactful.
I just thought it was really interesting being able to see the different cultures represented between the U.S. cemetery and the German cemetery, and I think it's really cool that the Germans were allowed to have a cemetery here.
I found it interesting the contrast between the two cemeteries, but what it made me think about was neither of these two cemeteries is really about religion. They're about something else. And the war was not really about religion, but I think about the wars that we have now and how infused with a kind of faux religious zeal. And it made me think about the cemeteries of what the cemeteries of today would be for the people who are fighting against terrorism or whatever we call it, and the terrorists that are fighting against us. What are their cemeteries like?
So when we were at the American Cemetery, I split off from the rest of the group, and I found there's this little area basically at the back center of the whole cemetery where they have a couple of large statues and a bench to sit at. And when you sit at that bench, you're really able to grasp the whole like scale of the entire cemetery and just like how many people gave their lives in order for you to be there, just be walking around and being free. So that was a cool experience.